Thank you, good people, for your thoughts and non-prayers, and welcome back to another episode of The Nonprofits. The Nonprofits is a product of the ACA, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the separation of religion and government and promoting positive atheism. I am this week's conductor. You guys, it's my first week conducting. Oh my God. I am Arden of Eden, and with me today are three lovely hosts. First on my left is Christy Powell.
Howdy.
And then we have our lovely and resident Cynthia.
Hi, everybody.
And Mokti. How you doing?
Very good, thanks. Hello, everyone.
Awesome. So happy to see everyone. So happy to be here. Has anyone got any stuff they want to plug? Like, how's your week been and all that good stuff? Well, I guess we probably can't get into too much of that.
I've been listening to all kinds of new music that I hadn't been exposed to. This being International Non-Binary Peoples Day.
Yes.
My local radio station is playing non-binary artists all day long, so it's been really great.
Awesome. Love to hear that. That's a good positive little jump off to our show. So what do y'all say? Are we just gonna dive right in? Are you good to kick it off?
Yeah, there's a lot to do
wanna
here. Let's do it.
Yep.
Take the lead, Multi, for this first article.
Well, sure. So the first thing we'll be talking about are health care sharing ministries, which are not healthcare. So they share what it is a way with people that share a common set of ethical or religious beliefs to then share medical expenses among the nonprofit. It's a 501c3. This is kind of a bastard child of the Affordable Care Act. Kind of got wedged in there, so people that would only want to say provide health care for someone that didn't get in an accident where someone was drinking, then that would be one of the things they could do. It's a really interesting idea, I guess. I can go deeper into what they are, pros and cons and things like that. But what else do you have anything? All the rest of you have a little something about what you think of these things, or what you?
Well, I think it's important to jump in and recognize that we're talking about healthcare share ministries, which have been around, I believe, in some form or fashion, really for 100 years or more. But we're talking about something that was like legally created as an entity in the 80s. But really, the reason we're here talking about them now is because of the incredible incidents of fraud that we're seeing pop up around these types of ministries. And
right.
I don't know, I think it's worth just kind of taking a moment here at the top to separate out the the intended purpose and the notion that we're wanting to be looking at versus like the incredible fraud that we're seeing here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
good point. So, what they are supposed to be is a generally less expensive in terms of premiums way for people to have some kind of coverage. These are, as I said, healthcare sharing ministries are a 501c3 nonprofit. And so that is, I think, leading into one of the reasons why there is this fraud is because they are not regulated by the insurance commissioner, but related by the state attorney general's office and the IRS. So some people say that a healthcare ministry might be better than like nothing at all. However, they can refuse coverage for a myriad of reasons. Then that one thing about they don't have to pay for any procedures, that's not in line with their common held ethical or religious beliefs. They won't cover pre-existing healthcare, pre-existing conditions, and the membership is limited to people who share that common religious faith. A lot of people who are healthy find these to be a good alternative. I use good very loosely there. Since they're when they pay in, if they're not paying out, if they don't need to collect on it, it's a way of covering their basis a little bit, but it makes the pool of insured people sicker if the healthy people are leaving to go into these health share ministries.
Sure, and that's where you see the problem here, right? Is it's not that this is a bad idea. I mean, the whole notion is that a community would come together and say, we're going to support each other. If one of us gets sick, then everybody's going to jump in. And particularly for really insular communities that are looking to avoid connection to wide-scale insurance and really just the American healthcare system itself, which is a whole episode worth of bitching and belly aching that we can do and will continue to do, I'm sure. But it's worth just noting that this is not an inherently bad idea, that this is an opportunity for people in a small community to come together and to support one another. Where it has become a problem is that the continuous gutting of the Affordable Care Act, the constant efforts to erase the individual mandate and to basically dismantle and destroy a piece of legislation that was meant to ensure access to good, affordable insurance for the entire country has been under assault. And one of those assaults has been creating this sort of loophole where people can say that, well, because I am a member of a healthcare share ministry, well, I don't need to be a part of Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. And if this was a healthcare share ministry that was reasonable and that was actually effective and useful, then sure, that might be a reasonable exemption for the legislation to include. But like you said, Malti, there is no regulation on these kinds of things. So what we have is not small communities banding together, offering to support one another, but instead basically a bunch of bullshit organizations that are printing out free exemption cards and saying yeah, send us a couple of dollars every month and sure, you've got coverage, so you don't actually have to participate in the national healthcare conversation. And even now that the mandates around joining the ACA have changed, that's how we got here, right? Was by people just looking for an excuse and an opportunity to avoid being part of the national conversation. And it's causing some really big problems, and it's giving some people a opportunity to be really taken advantage of, while also taking advantage of the wide-scale system.
So you said something very important: opportunity. And when we actually had ACA mandates that were put into place, that's when we actually saw an explosion of said healthcare ministries come into pass, right? These particular pool sharing to take care of doctor bills, things of that nature, when it comes to insular communities, were very much so prevalent amongst communities like the Amish, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of these particular entities that were created, and a lot of them were created fairly recently, I would say in the mid 2000s, one say 2010, 2016, up to 2016 is when we saw a lot of them come up, right?
Right, yeah. And after the creation of the Affordable Care Act, all of a sudden this loophole became incredibly tempting.
Exactly. Yeah. And people actually took advantage of it. But the thing is, in this because they keep saying or touting, we are not healthcare. We're not healthcare insurance, right? They feel they can oftentimes use these particular loopholes in order for them to say that we're not going to cover things like, primary care visits, pap smears, simple things oftentimes that will denote if you are going to actually live a healthy life. Malta, you mentioned if a person was drinking and maybe they actually had a car accident or what have you. Well, because they were
just fell down.
Yeah, hey, that's on you, right? And I think that one of the things that actually led us to even talking about this is recently how one of the companies were being sued because a payer, I think it was actually a pool of people, were not getting coverage for a lot of different medical bills that they were being submitting to the healthcare ministry. Specifically, this one is the Alira companies.
Mhm.
And the judge, actually, the federal judge, and this is in Atlanta, actually has ruled that the lawsuit is going to move forward, which is huge, because then what's going to end up happening is that there should be, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that there will be a more stringent mandates placed on these particular healthcare ministries to actually operate. I think that one of the people was actually said, well, actually, this is what the article said. It said the Aliro companies has always maintained it is not an insurance company. That's how it avoids following federal and state rules and laws that govern their issuers. But the judge disagreed. And I think another thing is to preface that, like, a reason why a lot of people were, leaving, like maybe like a marketplace plan, is because, and let's just keep it a buck, marketplace premiums can be very, very, very expensive. I've seen stories where premiums could be up to $2,000. And that's a lot of money to come out of, every month. I mean, like,
Yeah,
that's
I
like
mean,
rent and a half.
it's I don't want to call it a failed piece of legislation, but the Affordable Care Act is failing because it's had its legs cut out from under it, and this is one of the ways that that's happening. I mean, let's think about this whole process. People are looking to avoid participating in the Affordable Care Act or some other form of insurance. This gives them a nice out, so they join a healthcare share ministry.
Right.
Then something bad happens to them and they need medical coverage. But
Mhm.
because their healthcare share ministry isn't held to the same standards, or really, in a lot of ways, kind of any standards,
Right.
they're recognizing that they don't have coverage. So, on the one hand, I think you could see this as sort of, people being taken advantage of. And that's certainly what the judge is looking at here. These things look like insurance, they smell like insurance, they seem like insurance, but the premiums are really affordable. And so people might be being defrauded out of the healthcare coverage that they need. You could also choose to see this as a form of comeuppance for people who have been avoiding actually participating in the system and joining into the society that we all exist in. And I know when you start using society and some of these other words around healthcare and insurance, we start talking about single payer and communism and all of these like really scary socialist ideals. And that is the boogeyman that people are trying to avoid. So if you want to see this as people just getting their just desserts by not doing their part and participating in society, that's somewhat valid. And I think that we can acknowledge that that's a piece of this conversation. But we're also talking about actual living, breathing human beings with dire medical needs that are being told to basically fuck off because they didn't have the right type of coverage. And that is incredibly frustrating. So I'm glad that this lawsuit's moving forward. And I hope it leads to change and reform.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a lawsuit, and the Attorney General of Washington State actually ordered Alira to pay $1 million for selling illegal health insurance. This was in 2020. And they asked a judge, "Hey, man, we're a healthcare sharing ministry." But the judge said, "No, you're acting as insurance and you're doing a very poor job of it." There's another little wrinkle here that there was only supposed to be a small pool of these health share ministries, in that they had to have been instantiated before 1999. However, Alera was instantiated before then, but Trinity, who is now using Alera as their clearinghouse, pretty much,
Yeah,
is saying,
shell company.
yeah. So since Alera has it, then we'll just partner with Alera, and now we can do this too, or say, hey, we are a part of the Baptist Convention. They've been around for over 100 years, so we've been around, even though it's a brand new incorporation. We've been around for over 100 years as well.
That's the loophole that oftentimes that these companies are oftentimes actually hooking up with other organizations, faith-based organizations, in order for them to operate. I don't know if any of you all actually got a chance to see the segment on John Oliver's, what is his show called?
Last Week Tonight.
Last week, yeah, thank you. I know that he actually did a whole segment about healthcare sharing ministries, and he actually created one from his and used the church thing that he created, Our Lady of Perpetual something
Exemption.
and thank you, because that's exactly what it is, right? A tax exemption, rather.
Mm-hmm.
And because at that particular company, that church that they created was around that time period, they were actually able to create a healthcare share ministry just like that. And it was incredibly easy to do. And that is so problematic. Like, I would think that in any entity that's affording business licenses or any type of license to operate in states, these types of organizations need a hell of a lot more scrutiny than what they're getting, which is really nothing at all.
Yeah, it's a microcosm of everything that we're seeing in the current debate around the separation of church and state. We all come together, we all agree on what some good rules and policies and laws might look like. We debate, we argue, we vote, and then we settle on something. But then we create all of these exemptions for sincerely held beliefs. And that whole notion of sincerely held belief has been expanded and expanded and expanded to include this opportunity to basically have bullshit get out of insurance free cards.
Yeah. And on that kind of note of this will get out of insurance free thing, and I think this has been touched on a little bit by some of y'all already. I do empathize with where like a lot of these people are coming from, because I mean, like we talked about this a little bit in the pre-show, and that I wasn't able to find the specific primary source, but this has been something that has been cited back going like decades, that people who are uninsured, people dying due to preventable causes because they were uninsured, that the numbers like range a lot. I've seen as low as 3,300 to 25,000. But like, I think everyone probably has a personal story or might even know someone in their own life who, got prescribed medicine by a doctor and their insurance company still won't cover it. The legitimate insurance company that they're paying for. So I understand why these communities who are frustrated, like feeling like they're not being taken care of by their government, who are a part of a faith community, will look to an organization like this and think, well, these people have stayed by me in my personal communities. Why not turn to them in this kind of situation? And you can see through the marketing of companies like Alira that they completely play on people's, their expectation of that kind of community to support them, and the like how analogous they are to insurance companies in their advertising to get people involved. But and then you have situations where someone has like this little girl who had a brain surgery, and then all of a sudden she has a $300,000, I think it was $300,000 bill.
$350,000 bills.
Yeah, $350,000 bill that they get sent after that. Like, it's truly heartbreaking that these communities thought they had someone they could rely on, and that, the system has failed them, and then their own communities took advantage of them and failed them. I think it truly just reveals how much of a issue healthcare is in general in the United States right now. Even from a legitimate perspective.
Yeah, I mean, all of this fraud is definitely taking place, at least in large part, because people are desperate and because there isn't a better opportunity. And quite frankly, people are being lied to. I've kind of created, accurately or inaccurately, this dichotomy of like fraud versus comeuppance, and people sort of getting what they deserve or whether or not they're being taken advantage of. But the reality is, everybody who is participating in these healthcare share ministries is being fed a message that is coming from people that know absolutely what's going on. And a lot of this messaging is coming from the top, and it is just incredibly aggravating to see possible solutions like the Affordable Care Act, which was not perfect in its inception by any means, but has been basically demonized as the reason why everything is going wrong in our current healthcare system, even though the Affordable Care Act itself has been sabotaged at every possible step. It's frankly just really exhausting. I don't blame people for wanting to opt out of the conversation, but here we are. If we don't take this shit seriously, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, beautifully said. Last thoughts from Cynthia and Multi as well. Anything else you want to tag on there?
I just wanted, there was this one portion of one of the articles that we were given, and that said that it's 100% true that when it comes to how healthcare sharing ministries can legally discriminate against needy paying customers because of factors ranging from tobacco use to alcohol or drug use to being gay to having sex outside of marriage to literally anything they and they alone determine is outside the bounds of their particular judgmentally lawsuit-proof brand of corporate Christianity. Another reason why Christianity rules everything. That's my final thought.
Multi?
Yeah, I couldn't say it better. So yeah, awesome. If this shows anything, the need for single payer is even more dire.
Agreed. So before we move on to the next article, I want to remind our viewers that if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to this channel and click the like button below. Set the notification bell to on so that you're always notified when a new episode premieres every Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Time. And we are now officially over 8,000 subscribers. So hooray to us. Way to go, everybody. Once we hit 10,000, we can start doing fundraisers. So if you haven't subscribed yet, you can help us get there by doing so now. And you can share the link to our channel with your friends, families, and coworkers, and maybe even to that neighbor guy you don't really like. Anyone and everyone, let's get the word out there so we can start helping with those fundraisers. The ACA also has a new YouTube channel. Check out the Atheist Experience Network, a one-stop shop for all the ACA shows in podcast form in one channel. Subscribe at tiny.cc/AEN podcasts to listen to episodes of The Nonprofits, AXP, Truth Wanted, and all of our other shows so you don't miss a single episode.
Thank you for mentioning secular sexuality as in all our other shows. And the rest. We've got some great programming. Check it out.
In my defense, it wasn't on the script, but secular sexuality is my favorite show on the ACA network. So I'll say that. Very underrated. But our next article, Boy Scouts reach $850 million settlement with tens of thousands of sexual abuse victims. So in this story, I think this has been talked about a lot in the for years. This has kind of been a thing that's been, being voiced and dragged out. I believe there are over 80,000 alleged victims, and I think I want to make sure I get this right. Was it 20,000 that were involved in this particular lawsuit that's upcoming?
As I understand it, all 80,000 victims are eligible as part of this lawsuit, but they are represented possibly by a number of different lawyers and law firms. It's a very, very complex suit because it is the biggest class action sexual assault lawsuit ever brought in this country.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's truly horrible. And I mean, I think it's great that there is at least some sort of accountability coming, but I think one of the survivors in the NBC segment that they recorded was mentioning, that he had lost some of his family had already passed away, and he wasn't even able to talk about this with them. And how could you ever put a price tag on repairing what emotional damage he's gone through, what things he's lost, what things he's never going to get back due to the abuse that he suffered that was largely ignored for decades. Mm-hmm. So yeah, how are you all feeling? What are you thinking about this?
I just wanted to preface really quick, according to the article, that more than 84,000 people are part of the lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America, and The lead attorneys, I believe Ken Rottweiler and Eisenberg Rottweiler in Philadelphia, represents the largest group of claimants, which is about over, according to the article, more than 16,800 people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a little bit of how the soup is made on my side. I actually do talk about what I'm going to be talking about to the community, the atheist community, and to get some feedback and to get to use a sounding board. And one of the things that was brought up was the same type of abuse that occurred in the in athletics. Especially the Paralympic and the Olympic Committee went through lawsuits, was it 20 years ago or so now, with the men's basketball, or no, excuse me, men's wrestling and women's gymnastics. And out of that came the U.S. Center for Safe Sports. And this is a nonprofit that is separate from the Olympics. I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but I think it makes sense. And what they're there for is to train, to teach, to observe, and to report on sexual abuse in sports to decrease its occurrence. And I don't know. I mean, I think the Boy Scouts might need some kind of regulation, like minor league sports, like this, to try to prevent this from going on in forward.
Yeah. In the article, they did mention that going forward, they're kind of introducing some new policies to make sure that kids are never alone with one adult at a time, which I think is, it's a start. It's something, because I mean, definitely, being alone with a kid in and of itself isn't a risk factor, but when people have other risk factors of being abusers, putting them in a position of power and privacy with a child is like a recipe for abuse. I know they're also introducing like background checks and things like that, but I don't know how you guys are feeling. I know I am kind of feeling like, while I understand how important this organization is to some people, and maybe it's possible that it could survive in some sort of fashion, it kind of feels to me like maybe it's time for like a complete rebranding, like a new name. Like maybe it's just the Scouts, or maybe this organization dies altogether and a like completely separate one from the ground up is started in its fashion, in its place. Does that kind of resonate with you guys?
Yeah, that was what left me so frustrated about so much of the conversation around this. There is valid concern. I get it, of people worrying about, well, what if the Boy Scouts of America, or even just the individual Boy Scout chapters, are then forced to sell off assets. Now these pristine summer camps that have been in existence for 20, 40, 50, sometimes some as much as 100 years are being like sold off in order to liquidate funds and provide support to these victims. And what if like future generations of Americans don't have that opportunity? And you know what? I'm not looking for that. Like, I'm not looking to take away the opportunity to enjoy outdoorsmanship and some of these things from young children. But this is not an organization that you had found in 2021. There is so much of why this organization exists that is wrapped up in nostalgia. And that nostalgia makes me angry, because not only did this happen, not only did this continue to happen, not only was this allowed and facilitated to continue to happen, but so much of the conversation that empowered this abuse was around the idea that the perpetrators of this abuse were just garden variety gay men. I think that absolutely needs to be brought into the conversation, that when we first started to hear stories about this type of abuse coming out in the 90s and even after that, so much of the narrative was, well, we need to run background checks, which, yes, certainly you're hanging out with children, but we need to prevent all gay men from participating in the Boy Scouts of America. That's the legacy of this organization. And if we're not going to really grapple with that, then I don't need this organization to continue to exist. If they're not going to like meaningfully address that history and own that narrative, then I don't know that they need to be saved. I don't know that we need to be all nostalgic and have all of these rose-colored glasses about what this organization is or has been in the past.
You know, this is, so the wrestling point is how can we take like some of the good portions that that the Boy Scouts of America gave to kids, like you mentioned, Christy, the outdoorsmanship, right? Running, I don't know how many times over the summer that my parents have sent me outside because I was driving them nuts because I need to run around and go play.
Sure.
And you know, and of course, like I've done like summer camps and things of that nature, and you do learn skills, and you do actually be able to build relationships, and all those things are very important in order to help, you know, develop a well-adjusted human being. But the problem is especially with organizations, and I would even go even further with faith-based organizations that actually work with children, and especially if they don't have background checks the way that they should, that is going to be an open door for predators.
I'm glad you used that term, faith-based organization, which this is. I mean, let's keep in mind that this is a means of indoctrination into Christianity.
Yes, it is.
And nationalism.
And nationalism.
Which I don't know how much more white Christian nationalism we really need.
None. We need none of that at all.
Fair. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Negative 200% on that one.
Indeed, indeed. You know, and then another thing that I kind of like glean from, like, you know, my cursory research on this whole issue is that one of the things that they mentioned about when they were filing for Chapter 11 protection, because since these lawsuits were coming, the Boy Scouts of America start bleeding money. And so they were asking for protection, or if we just create like a fund that you know, people could, you know, use, or, you know, to pull from to cover these lawsuits, let's do that, and then they, you know, they'll get like bankruptcy protection. But you know, one of the things that I believe that one of the spokespeople said that we are heartbroken that we cannot undo their pain. And they also mentioned that, well, you know, the last claim was over 30 years ago. But the thing about it is that, and we've seen this even with other organizations concerning like the age of claims, that just because that the last claim that you got was over 30 years ago does not necessarily mean that that is the last claim or the last incident that happened.
Sure.
I mean, you know, and I would not, I'll bet you by golly wow, my last bottom dollar, that there's going to be way more claims and way more incidences that have not been reported concerning sexual abuse with this particular organization.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth recognizing that this money is not just a punishment, right? Like that's perhaps a consideration here, but this is money that is meant to compensate victims and to support victims. I mean, I have not worked with a Boy Scout myself, but I have worked in this type of field, and I'll tell you what, I'm not cheap. You know, these types of bills are add up very, very quickly, and it's worth recognizing that. I don't know if 850 million is enough. I don't know that we can really answer that by talking to the lawyers. You're gonna get a very different and complex answer there, but it is just heartbreaking to recognize the lack of options and opportunities here.
Yeah. You know, another thing that I actually found on this story was I looked at a story about a man who was telling what happened to him about 58 years ago, when he was in when he was in the Boy Scouts. If I may, if you give me a little leeway.
Mm-hmm.
So 58 years ago, Edward Pitson said, the scoutmaster who had taught him skills like how to use a compass and light a campfire, said he was going to teach Pitson about sex. The Scoutmaster invited Pitson, who was 12, to his house and asked him to lie on the bed. The man assured the boy he had seen other Boy Scouts naked. This is the normal way to learn about sex. Pitson recalls the Scoutmaster telling him, "He said, but don't tell your parents what I'm doing. They wouldn't think you're mature enough. They wouldn't understand." The man told him a dirty story, pulled down his pants, and masturbated him. Pitson can't remember if this happened one time or if the Scoutmaster invited him over again a few weeks later. But he does remember pulling up his pants after a few minutes and walking out of the room. He called after me, calling me a baby and trying to make me feel guilty, Pitson recalls. "I just want to go home." And then it says, about 4 years later, Pitson, around 16 and furious that a man remained a Scoutmaster, told his parents what had happened. He says his parents went to the bishop at their local church in Northern California, the same church that sponsored the Boy Scouts troop. And the Scoutmaster was quietly removed from his position. Pitson said he also spoke to the bishop, but as far as he knows, nobody reported the Scoutmaster to the police. And where have we heard accounts like that before?
Mm-hmm.
Fair to say.
Yeah. So in talking to fellow atheists who have children that are scouting age and have participated in scouts, they're torn whether or not to continue to have them participate in this in scouting. One, because they don't want to be helping the Boy Scouts, making it easier for them to pay the. It's strange because you want to, as you said, Christy, this payout is for the victims. It is, in somewhat to try to heal, and in somewhat as a recompense, I guess. But then my friends are like, I want to be able to provide the kids with this experience, but maybe we'll do t-ball because maybe we just something else that is athletic. You don't need to learn to tie knots, but it still gets some activity, and you have the team building aspects of sports, and you have the communication skills as well. Again, that's something else that is going to be needed to be watched, and but harkening back, the U.S. Center for Safe Sports and being part of Safe Sports is something that I think lots of different sports groups can be a part of. It is a nonprofit that is already established and is doing this work. The Boy Scouts right now, I don't know. I really would love to see a separate overseeing body put in place. If that would be one good step, I think. Yeah. So for now, why don't we move on to our next segment? And if Christy, if you wouldn't mind, if you could lead us in on this.
Okay, yeah, we're going to be talking about an article that was published in the journal Secularism and Non-Religion. This is a research piece that is doing basically a data analysis on some large spread general survey information that's widely available, looking at whether or not atheists are being discriminated against by Christians and other religious groups, and also whether or not atheists themselves are discriminatory towards religious groups. Basically, the article itself is something of a research review, and then does its own meta or data analysis and comes to some somewhat interesting conclusions. I don't know. I guess we'll get into it a little bit, but I think it's important to remember that regardless of maybe the claims of this article or the way that we might otherwise try to frame it, that it is looking to answer a very, very simple question. Like, it kind of talks about all of these different possibilities, but ultimately, in my mind, all this research paper really serves to do is ask the question whether or not religious groups discriminate against atheists and vice versa. But even that definition of atheist is kind of fuzzy. I don't know. We'll get into that here in a bit, I guess. But what was y'all's reaction to this piece?
Well, I first like to point out that I literally laughed out loud when Jeff Sessions was quoted. And the quote was, I do believe that we are a nation that without God, there is no truth. And it's all about power, ideology, advancement, agenda, not doing the public service. So that was Jeff Sessions. So let's say a pause and think of that, because that's Jeff Sessions. Okay, moving on. One of the things that I think that struck a chord with me specifically when we're talking about theistical groups that look at atheists in some shape, way, or form. There's oftentimes perpetuated tropes. We're not moral. People want to be atheists so that they can sin. My favorite is atheists worship the devil. I know that's exactly what we don't do. We don't even believe in the devil. Atheists have no purpose. I've gotten that one before. Like, well, where do you get your purpose? I'm like, me. Atheists don't believe in anything. And I know that you're probably going to get into, what is an atheist? I think, like, oftentimes, like, people look at, like, atheism as a worldview, atheism as a philosophy, atheism is all, and it's none of those things. It answers one question, like literally one question: do you believe in a God? Nah. Moving on. So but I think that, like, when it comes to these particular tropes and, like, what we're trying to dispel, even when we're talking about favoritism and non-favoritism, and then how we're even perceived, I think you pretty much get my point.
Yeah, despite also the maybe the more controversial and spicy aspects of this article, like the exciting Jeff Sessions, or we can talk more. I know, Malti, in your notes, you mentioned some of the other citations have some pretty wild titles and things like that. Christy, I think maybe this is kind of what you were alluding to, but the data itself seemed pretty non-controversial to me and pretty in line with some other literature that has been backed through relatively reliable sources, meaning that, like, in as much as that atheists are looked on pretty poorly by a lot of other in-groups, but that atheists have maybe a slight in-group bias, but not really that much of I guess just more to say that atheists are very not monolithic. They're a very broad range of people, because, as you were pointing out, Cynthia, atheism is literally the answer to one question. You can be an atheist and you can believe in, like, ghosts and a lot of really crazy things. I have, believe it or not, met some atheists who believe in some, maybe crazy is the offensive word to use in that situation, but believe in some things you can't prove.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting when I was looking at this article, in that it's coming from an open source publisher that has other journals like metaphysics, and even the title of this journal, Secularism and Non-Religion. made me kind of wonder, okay, what am I kind of walking into here? But when I start digging down into it, and I see the citations that they're putting out, and it's just all it's doing is making my reading list longer and longer. Some of these articles were just wonderful. Atheist horns and religious halos, mental representation of atheists and theists,
Wish I had one.
atheist and other cultural outsiders, moral boundaries and the non-religious in the United States. Why are you atheists so angry? 99 things that piss off the godless. That's Greta Christina. She was on the show, actually. She was on Atheist Experience back in 2016. We should get her back. As I continued to go through, and what I found as I read through this is I just kept on nodding along with what they were saying. Is these are things that I find that are so known to be true. I'm just like, I didn't need to dig very deep to find that what they were saying had merit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm gonna disagree a little bit with Cynthia here, and honestly, most of our audience, and perhaps each of you, and I'm a little bit okay with that. But I really want to look at this idea of atheism being the answer to a singular question. I feel like that is a really common talking point within our community, and one that we perhaps need to do a better job of grappling with. Forgive me if this is a wasted metaphor on some of you folks, but as a fighting Texas Aggie myself, I graduated from the University of Texas A&M, and I am very, passionate about our sports team, just like everybody who goes there. And, we are members of a group that all have that shared commonality. And part of being an Aggie, of course, is hating on the University of Texas Longhorns and, that rivalry and Aggies versus Longhorns, that whole thing. Okay, so now the folks who don't live here in Austin are caught up. Part of the conversation around that narrative is that that Texas A&M is in a small town of about 200,000 people, and has a university of about 100,000 people. So it is a college town. It is not a town with a college in it, as opposed to Austin, which is not a huge metropolitan area, but there's something of a vacuum here. There's not a lot of professional sports in the immediate space around Austin. So a lot of folks in San Antonio and the surrounding, couple like 10 years ago, the Longhorns used to have the opportunity to compete for a couple of national championships, had a lot of media coverage and things like that. So there's this narrative in this rivalry where if you see somebody wearing a Aggie t-shirt, that's probably a person who has at the very least been to the Texas A&M campus. If they didn't go to Texas A&M themselves, they have a friend or a family member and they have a connection to that university. Whereas they say if you see somebody wearing a UT Longhorns t-shirt, that person went to Walmart or to HEB, and that's where they got their shirt, because there's this huge crowd of people that sort of claim connection to or affiliation with the university, but that aren't deeply connected to it. And that is a huge issue that comes up and that is covered in this article or in this research study, because when we talk about religious affiliation, we have some very loose terms. Like nobody describes themselves as being a cultural atheist. Whether or not people believe in a god or a gods, when people identify as an atheist, they are almost exclusively talking about atheist activists. They are talking about people who knowingly and intentionally have made a specific decision not to be a nun, not to be somebody who just doesn't believe in God, but who actually believes, if not in the positive atheism espoused by the ACA, positive atheism here meaning the idea that atheism should do something, that it should make the world a better place. Because we don't necessarily have that distinction in the research, that word atheism starts to become kind of useless in a lot of ways. And so when we talk about atheism as a community, I feel like we need to do a better job of recognizing that distinction between a belief in a God or gods versus people that are actually interested in helping to deconvert folks, to create a wall of separation between church and state. And that's where this whole study starts to fall apart for me, because they're talking about the prejudices and the biases against people who are labeled as atheists, when what they really mean is people who are actively working to dismantle religion. At least that was my reading of it. Thank y'all for letting me go on that long rant. Did I make any sense whatsoever?
I mean, you gave me something to think about. I will say that, Christy. I mean, and I guess that one of the reasons why I have a tendency to, and I'm not going to say dig my heels, because like if I am presented with a different argument that makes more sense, I have a tendency to go with that one, or reasoning that makes more sense. And I get what you're saying, because like, yes, when I think that what ends up happening now with atheism itself, and I'm using a very broad, in a broad way, that when you say you're atheist, it kind of leads to this, it kind of leads to this, it kind of leads to this. Like, oftentimes people who say that they're atheists also say, I'm also a secular humanist. And then you also have people who are like purposely atheist activists, are working in different circles in order to really set up these separations between church and state, or religion and state. And you have organizations that have organized, for lack of a better term, around these issues that threaten that, right? But I suppose that like where I kind of, my brain kind of leads off to when I think of specifically what is an atheist, and does it encompass a whole lot of stuff, or is it just this one thing? And I guess like for me, and this is just my own personal like observations when these particular conversations come up, is that atheists can have such varying views on a plethora of subject matter. Oftentimes, and I think that the article kind of talks about this a little bit, we have alluded to it in the past, about how like more atheists have a tendency to be more progressive in their politics. They have a tendency to be more socially leaning. They have a tendency, to be more vocal about issues that affect marginalized communities. But that's not a preface to doing those things, or even like speaking on social justice per se. Like you have some atheists that are racist, right? You have some atheists that are
I mean, I can find Christians that are pro-life and
oh yeah,
pro-abortion. I can find
yeah,
Christians that are just as diverse.
true.
I don't know that is any different in the atheism community. I
I
guess my only point is that idea that atheist means a lack of belief in a god or gods
mhm,
is a definition that makes sense and is good, and we could or should use it, but that's not
mhm.
how words work. When people say the
Right.
word atheist, they have a definition in mind, and that's not it.
That's
Pardon?
true.
I
I
do
agree with you.
agree. I was going to say, I do think that the article did distinguish between what they were calling atheists and non-religious atheists. And I think the atheist category was more of like kind of what you're talking about, Christy, the group that maybe like gets together and does things, maybe the more like the American atheists or anything like that. Groups
Those are the
that
people that are captured in this study. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
They did mention that they sampled, I believe, like a non-religious atheist, which is just kind of meant to be sort of like a maybe someone who is culturally Christian, like an equivalent.
Mhm.
But I imagine it wasn't entirely clear to me from the data, like how I'm pretty sure they said they had a pretty weak effect size too for their feelings towards other groups. But there was like marginal differences that were maybe worth mentioning. Or sorry,
One of
Monty, you
the
said?
Yeah, one of the things that I found interesting was when they were trying to gauge what Christians' views of atheists were, and how they were doing that. I don't know that I mean, I'm trying to understand you, Christy, in that when you're saying it, are those the atheists that you think that they were trying to prime these Christians to be thinking about when they were doing this threat-based approach to kind of find out what these college student atheists were, what their feelings towards anti-atheism was, or
Yeah. Yeah, when they are what the study effectively does is demonstrate the fact that people of different religious groups tend to have in-group cohesion and out-group discrimination, and we can demonstrate that in a lot of different ways. But that we generally see atheists as perhaps the most hated out-group.
yeah,
That members of other groups tend to look down on atheists. If you are Muslim, you are more likely to look down on atheists than you are on Christians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I see that in the data. I think that this is an interesting study. I think that they did a good job of demonstrating that using the kind of crude methods that they did, because this was not their research. This was using other forms of data. But nevertheless, my only point is that when they use the word atheist in this study, when they are talking to Christians about how they feel about atheists, or talking to Jews about how they feel about atheists, you're not able to control exactly what that word means in those people's minds. And
yeah,
I'm telling you that it doesn't mean a person who lacks a belief in God or gods. It
Sure.
means a person who is actively working to dismantle their belief system, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
not untrue, but it's an
Mm,
important distinction, and it's one that I feel our community has done perhaps a poor job of really grappling with.
Well, maybe this is more so a call to action of us, or people who are like-minded, as far as like who consider themselves activists in this realm. I know that I've had conversations with people who are friends and family who question me about being atheist, and oftentimes what's in their head about what led me to being an atheist is completely the opposite of what led me to being an atheist, or even like my stance on issues and my own worldview. And I think that I agree that the atheist community at large has not really been maybe not that uh, uh, effective in communicating what atheism is. And I would say part and partial is maybe because we're still very small within a world, or even if we're looking at the country that's like largely Christian or largely theistical, right? And then also, there's still these stereotypes, these tropes. In the article actually even points out some of them, what others think about what an atheist is. So um, I'm grateful for the ACA and other organizations who really try to really capture the narrative of what that is, because once, like, even when I had these conversations with others, and I kind of like explain my stance or what have you, it does have a tendency to disarm them.
mm,
When I say, yeah, hey, guess what? I don't cook babies on the weekend. I know you thought I did, but I don't. I care about things just like as much as you do. I care about doing charity. I care about my fellow human being. I care about a lot of these things, and I do participate in different organizations. It doesn't even matter if they're faith-based or not. As long, are you doing good? Hey, I'm down. And there's more people who may just lack a belief that are like that as well. So, to me, again, I think this is an opportunity. The word of the day that Christy likes to use, an opportunity
Sure.
for us to really be able to get in front of the narrative and maybe, change some more minds.
that is a
Awesome.
great point. Yeah, to be able to normalize atheism in a way that so we don't have this. Oh, you're a member of the. Are you the ones that are putting up the Baphomet statues, or whatever else? I mean, I think there is some good that's coming out of showing the privileges that religious organizations do enjoy and how the discrimination is there. Though the way that they do it, I do agree, may leave believers feeling insulted or patronized, or and yes, babies take a while. It's not just a weekend thing. I mean, it's a slow cook. So
Yeah.
it started on Thursday.
Awesome. Well, does anyone have any last thoughts before we want to move on to our last article of the night or the episode? No?
We're good, I think.
All right. Well, I'm getting a little echo. We're meant to do this little blurb too after the second article, but I was called back to the Shadow Realm by our Dark Lord. But I would like to invite the viewers, to join our fan social media outlets. You can find most of the nonprofit hosts on the Atheist Community of Discord by going to tiny.cc/ACA Discord and on Facebook at facebook.com/group/nonprofitslive. If you would like to support the show, you can also do so by becoming a nonprofit patron at patreon.com/thenonprofits. Support the ACA by shopping at smile.amazon.com and selecting the Atheist Community of Austin as the beneficiary. If you find yourself already shopping at Amazon, be sure to use that link to help out the ACA. We really appreciate it. It does do a lot to help. So with that, though, we just spent all that time talking about maybe kind of perceptions of the religious community towards atheism. But our next article, Cynthia is going to take the lead on, kind of talks a little bit maybe towards theistic perceptions generally.
Indeed. And I believe this is a step in the right direction. Step in the right direction. Yeah, step in the right direction. Let's step in the right direction. Yeah. Okay. You got your singing, people. There you go. So this particular article is entitled White Gen X and Millennial Evangelicals are losing faith in the conservative culture wars. And I'm just going to read a little bit from the article. And it says, since the 1970s, white American evangelicals, a large subsection of Protestants who hold to a literal reading of the Bible, have often managed to get specific privileges through their political engagement, primarily through supporting the Republican Party. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan, and I remember him quite well, symbolically consolidated the alliance by bringing religious freedom and morality into public conversations that questioned the separation of church and state. And in 2003, and I just found this out, President George W. Bush signed the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act into law. And in October 2020, President Donald Trump appointed a conservative Christian, Amy Coney Barnett, to the Supreme Court and went on to win 80% of the white evangelical vote in the following month's election. And Trump went as far to appoint faith consultant board composed of influential evangelical leaders that included Paula White, a well-known pastor and televangelist, and James Dobson, founder of Focus on the Family, and a leading organization in the evangelical effort to embed family values into politics. And these panel members heralded gestures by Trump, such as signing the presidential executive order promoting free speech and religious liberty, which targeted enforcement of the Johnson Amendment, a 1954 tax law requiring houses of worship to stay out of politics in order to remain tax exempt. And I just want to just run along and say here that although it's debate on where specifically constituents and constitutes an evangelical, many agree that they are conservatives who are highly motivated by culture wars in issues like abortion, same-sex marriage, and sexuality. But even though evangelicals are often presented as a monolith in the media, current research signals that there is a more complex picture. And the article actually goes on to talk about how that there is more of a departure, specifically of white evangelicals or those who actually call themselves Christian, that's within the Gen Xer and the millennial age group that is departing from these particular shelved issues like abortion, same-sex marriage, and sexuality. And they are actually seeing themselves departing from the same sensibilities that maybe their predecessors are holding and actually gen, using their bully pulpits rather in the media to espouse and actually tell everybody we don't want that up in America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was, definitely some things that were not surprising and somewhat disheartening. Things like the 80% of Americans identified as white Christians back in 1976, and that demographic is now down to 44%. There's your the departure from the evangelical into maybe mainline Protestantism. And there's also the growth of the NONE nuns as well. So I just talked a couple weeks ago about Russell Moore and Beth Moore, no relation, and how they left the Southern Baptist Convention in separate reasons, but these were some very notable, prominent people in the SBC who are going to be taking some people with them. They'll definitely have followers.
My mother was heartbroken when Beth Moore left.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, interpret that however you choose to, but she was really, really heartbroken to know that Beth Moore was no longer that Beth Moore was willing to get upset about Trumpism.
Wow.
Yeah. We talk about this kind of thing quite a lot on the nonprofits, and it's something that I'm kind of realigning to, I think, be more of a goal that I really like. And that is this shift of Christians, not away from Christianity in general, because I think it's maybe, even though that would be like my ideal fantasy world, I think it's maybe not as realistic. And I think pushing people in this direction where like you can hold on to your belief, but like, goddamn, I've never been so excited to hear that Gen Xers and millennials, which are getting tired of the culture war, because it really feels like sometimes that group are the people who perpetuate the culture wars the most. I mean, like, definitely, obviously, older generations did it too, but they kind of sort of pass on the mantle. So all I've known are people in that sort of range doing this. So hearing that, like, that many people are getting exhausted with the culture wars is so exciting to think that, like, I would much rather talk about, like actual concerns. Like we spent the first half of the show talking about healthcare and things like that. Those things matter to me. Arguing over like, some focus on the family bullshit about like, gay liberation, they're going to convert your kids. They're coming for your kids with the gay agenda kind of thing. It's so old and haggard, and it really accomplishes nothing. So I love this move towards the religious nuns and the sort of cultural Christians. I think it's a really good direction for our society to be going in, which is the name of the segment.
It reminds me of and I believe that we've seen this before. Well, depending on how old you are up in here, like in the '60s when you had like the rise of the hippies, right? You had a segment of now baby boomers who were departing from some of the values that their predecessors of the silent generation and and the lost generation, I think that they were called previous to that, held dear. Like a lot of them were, and I think that like, some of the catalysts for that were like the Vietnam War. Their parents oftentimes were supporters of World War II, right? They participated in like, the gathering of the tin cans, eating more spam, and holding on to the recycling more, like donating nylons and things like that. Everything for the war effort, right? So when you had the Vietnam War come around, you had like the sensibility, like, oh, we can go ahead and go back to that. Everybody band together so that we can win this war like we did in World War II. But the generation that came after them was like, no, this is a horrible war that we shouldn't even be part of it. We shouldn't even be in Vietnam. We are, and you are sending, you're drafting young people over to this war that should not be fought to die. you know and so and I see, and I almost see, like, recycling. I don't know if it's a bad lack of a better term, but this turning again to that same type of mindset to these Gen Xers and also millennials, and also the in between called the Zennials, to like actually depart from these same, I would call it, yes, a resurgence rather of that are departing from these same, like, shelved issues like abortion, same-sex marriage, et cetera. So it is exciting to see.
Mm-hmm. So this article from Salon.com, the white Gen X and millennial evangelicals are losing their faith, was taking a lot of their data from a published study from the Public Religion Research Institute that just came out.
Mm-hmm.
They did over, or about, I should say, just under 500,000 phone interviews from people over the past 7 years, over a course of 7 years. I think it was ending in 2019, the last of it. And they asked people about their religion, their age, their race, ethnicity, geography, and political preference. So this is a nonprofit organization that was wanting to look into this data because, like the U.S. Census Bureau, stopped collecting data about religion in the 1950s,
Mm-hmm.
separation in church and state and all.
Mm-hmm.
So it is good to have this data here. I didn't really dig deep into the Public Religion Research Institute and whether or not they have any biases, but I found it to be a good signal that the CEO, Robert P. Jones, had written a book, White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. That kind of leads me to more of a think that this might be some, and then if you have 500,000 people that you're talking to, and you do the data correctly, I'm hoping that this is showing that we're heading in the right direction. One thing that was a little disheartening is that there seems to be a slowing of the loss of Christians, whether, when like I said, we're going from white Christians at 80% and now down to 44. There is an increase in the non-religious, and there is an increase of the don't really cares. That is helpful. Though we are seeing again a slowing of the increase in those people. So I'd like to remind everyone to pull their atheist T-shirts out and be visible, I guess.
Indeed. I wanted to talk a little bit about PRRI. I actually subscribe to their newsletter, and I have read White Too Long. And I recommend it. And Robert Jones is actually a Christian. And in that particular book, he uses data and also history to show the basically, the white Christian church and white supremacy working some symbiotically. And the data that he actually pulls was from, like, a lot of the research that, because this is he's the CEO of it. So, like, he founded the nonprofit, was even showing like voting patterns of like white Christians, whether they are Catholic or mainline or even considered themselves evangelicals, which is more like the non-denominational or even like Baptist denomination of these particular sects, and actually showed that a lot of them voted very similarly. Like even like when we were talking about previously about like how they how like what was it, like the last segment about like how like a lot of these particular groups like voted for Trump and they have more conservative values, and that's what they and that they kind of lean on. And so he actually talks about like some of the history that goes into what the mind frame, I guess, for lack of correlation, that actually is showing when it comes to what these groups are actually passionate about, or what do they consider their issues. But the organization itself is nonpartisan, and I'm hoping that when it comes to like having conversations like this, or even if the people who are in the group, because I believe that the article did preface that you do have a group of evangelicals or white evangelicals that's within that age group that is trying to make changes from the inside. And if they're and a lot of it has to do with really having these conversations about, well, maybe these these issues that we're holding so near and dear are problematic. Maybe they hurt people. Maybe they there's an othering of others. Maybe we need to re-examine that. And so like I'm glad that this particular organization exists, even though like it is ran by a Christian. But at the same time, what I am seeing and what I got from the book itself is like a person that is taking data in history and not being afraid to actually face it head on and how it has shaped a nation.
Yeah, our country is getting more diverse. Our media is getting more diverse. I mean, people aren't gathering around the water cooler to talk about what was on Channel 3 at 7 o'clock last night, because everybody is on YouTube. Everybody has 5 million channels. And so we're getting better representation. We're getting younger folks who are less squigged out by the existence of queer people. And, there's a lot to be really hopeful to. But a couple of years ago, I was at an art museum and I saw a piece by George Rodrigue, the famous Cajun painter. And he talked about how when a culture starts to die, it becomes kind of a caricature of itself. There's this sort of death rattle where it's like this almost cartoonish version of itself. And Dr. Darrell Ray talks about something similar in his book, The God Virus, when he talks about sort of the groundswell of fundamentalism that comes as a response to sort of the dying off of the God virus in a lot of ways. And I would really like to choose to see what is going on in the divisiveness of our country right now, and sort of the white nationalism and everything that we could tie to Trumpism and these different things as a sort of death rattle, as a like sort of final gasp. But I guess I'm not entirely convinced that we are ready for a step forward. I mean, the last 4 or 5 years have been really heartbreaking in so many ways. And yeah, there are more queer people on TV. And there's also a lot of queer people on TV being used as a rallying cry and as a punching bag in so many of these communities. I read this article with some hopefulness, but I'm just not convinced that the numbers that they were using really showed that.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that while like as we've all said, this is good feeling that like there were still a massive amount of people who were able to go out and vote for Trump and his sort of like flavor of evangelical culture that he was kind of pushing in America. Like he's still got a lot of that. Yeah. He say again.
Oh, just the very least that he was courting, even if he's not a representative of that culture, he earned that culture's vote for a lot of reasons.
Exactly.
I just wanted to even preface that even more, that in actuality, when we saw a Trump come up, that was just a reaction to what was already there. You know, this was absolutely a backlash, or like an answering to the previous administration, right? And then with all of that came with all of this other stuff and this gunk that we said, oh, I didn't even know that that actually existed. Oh, I didn't even know that we othered people. I didn't even know that you can actually call people, say on and get that, you know, we are opening our borders to shithole countries. Like, yeah, that's the thing. And I'm like, well, that's already been there. It's not something that is shocking, but I think that what needs to happen, and this is what I'm kind of getting from reading this, is that it does not just say, oh, isn't that terrible, but it has to be to a point where we're saying that this is something that should not be accepted any longer. We as a country are more diverse. We are growing as a nation. We are a place of many different cultures that are, you know, melding into, you know, the American experience. And because of that, a lot of these older ways of thinking that are problematic, it's time that we start to dismantle them.
There are a lot, I agree, of diverse communities here in our nation, especially on the coasts. But then we also have some very insular communities. Looking at some of the information coming out of this research, is of the 10 least diverse counties in the U.S., that would be 10,000 people or greater. 8 of those are in Mississippi. So what do we do to try to increase the diversity, to try to increase cultural sensitivity, to normalize, you know, the smell of curry if you're not used to it, or all the different things that you might look at and say, "Oh, that's ucky. I'm not used to that. It's something new to me, so I'm going to try to." There's just this otherness that, as you said, Cynthia, you know, the othering that we need to keep an eye out for.
Let's all move to Mississippi.
Well, I was just gonna say, you know, I don't want to tell like any queer folk or any like POC that are like, you know, not ready to become activists, like move to Mississippi, like make friends with a bigot, like. But that said, I do think direct exposure to these people is what cures a lot of this ancient kind of stuff. Like knowing a queer person and being like, wow, you know, they were actually nice, and I don't think they were trying to make me gay. And I have a hunch that they actually probably don't eat babies or anything like that. Like it just knowing these people, I think, is the strongest antidote. But at the same time, again, I'm definitely not telling any queer people like move to Mississippi and make friends with bigots. Just if you do live in Mississippi, you know, like, and you are fortunate enough to be in the circumstances where you can shine a little bit brighter, maybe you're one of the few people who has a supportive family or something, I think you doing that can go so far. And if there's a better motivation than maybe changing the minds of bigots, it's that there are probably a lot of other like queer kids who are like, you know, the children of those people who you could shine and you could reach, and like telling them that they're okay. And these things, I feel like these lights are kind of like they reach across, you know, and it inspires other people, and it's a slow process, but yeah, I do think the representation really matters so much.
Yeah, I can always take me and my Jamaican mama and go down to Mississippi, open up a restaurant, and then cook a lot of curry dishes. We do that a lot, so we got you.
So can we do some last thoughts on this last article going around the table? Christy?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that I would like to be hopeful. And I do see the culture war shifting. I don't know that it's really getting better. I don't know that people are leaving it. I feel more like it is moved from a culture war to more like a cultural insurgency. I think about the intentional misinformation campaigns and things like that, whether we're talking about like foreign government actors or just a bunch of assholes getting together on 4chan and deciding to create a national conversation around kink and all of this kind of garbage. I'd like to be hopeful. I've been doing this for a couple of years and I am struggling to maintain it.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Cynthia?
Well, I try to lean on to hope. My work that I do and with, and as case management, makes me kind of do that, especially like when you are facing people who are living with a chronic illness, and especially if they've been living it with a long time, but they're still having issues like paying rent or just being able to afford their medication. Just being that, voice of reason to say, no, we're going to figure this out, um, means so much to a person who may not necessarily see, the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that when it comes to, exposing ourselves to conversations like this about, changing of the guards, or even like a possibility that can happen, I think that, using hope to kind of drive us to keep doing this work is worthwhile.
Agreed. Yeah. I just try to keep in mind that the demographics are changing. We are losing the baby boomers are slowly leaving us, and so that's bringing this change to I think a group that is less Republican, more Democrat, peoples that are more diverse in their thinking, and so that is hopeful for me.
Awesome. I love the nice positive flavor. We got a good diversity. We got some realism from Christy and ending on the positivity.
Sorry, you don't have to keep inviting me back if I'm just going to be negative about everything.
No, we
I
love
don't
you,
mean to be the
Christy.
contrarian, although I do really look forward to reading all of the very angry YouTube comments saying 10 different ways atheism is just the lack of belief in a God. I get it. I get it. I just think that our conversation could have more.
Maybe we can get 10 comments in the YouTube comment. That'd be great. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah, or email us. Tell us what you think, what you like and what you don't like.
Actually, before we wrap up here, I do want to remind our viewers again that we do value your feedback. Tell us what you like and what you don't like in the comments, or email us at nonprofits@atheist-community.org. And as with all of our shows, the links on today's topics and the news we discussed are going to be available in the description below. So feel free to pause the video, peruse through the material, and, call us out on anything that we messed up. And please don't take our word for it. Please do the research yourself. We are just random people online. We are not, the perfectly reliable people just because we're in front of a camera. But make sure you come back after doing your research to hear the rest of the discussion and add your 2 cents to it. But with that, everybody, I think we have come to the conclusion of our show. It's been so marvelous to be your conductor. And with that, viewers, we will see you all next week. Bye.
Great job.